Good evening, everybody. I am Lloyd Auerbach, Professor Paranormal. Welcome. Let's see a group of folks coming in. That's great. And this Sunday before Thanksgiving. I hope everybody's doing well. So looks like I see a couple of new names here, but some regulars who are with us all the time, which is great. Thank you very much for tuning in. Just a reminder to like and subscribe if you already haven't. Tell your friends, please, as we go through this. And just as also a reminder that past shows have been recorded. They are under the live tab on the channel. So we go back actually quite a ways. This is episode 36. It goes back more than a year at this point. So tonight, as always, I will be answering questions about the paranormal, parapsychology, psychic stuff, pop culture maybe as it kind of crosses over if you want to get into that. And as always, I will answer questions about chocolate too. I just to get things started, I'll just mention that last weekend I was actually in North Carolina, Friday the 15th and Saturday the 16th. I was spending time at the Rhine Research Center. Friday night, I did a lecture for the Rhine. And, this is something you might want to check into every once in a while. That was the last lecture of the year that's going to be webcast that they're doing. My lecture, which eventually will get up on the website. Right now, they're having a problem with a technical issue with linking to the videos that they've already had. They had whatever was going on in the back end just between the website and the videos that are up on Venmo on one of the different sites, unfortunately, kind of broke, and they're trying to figure out how to fix that. But I did a lecture on magic and parapsychology, basically talking not about the kind of magic that Harry Potter does or that alchemists and other folks might do, but I did a lecture on stage magic and its crossover with spiritualism and early psychical research. And then really kind of, because I've got a foot in both worlds, the worlds of magic and mentalism and the world of parapsychology, talk quite a bit about the history of magic, history of mentalism, kind of the difference between magic and mentalism, because they are a little bit different. And again, how it crossed over with spiritualism and how magic conjuring, as it was called in the 19th century, actually influenced spiritualists to the point where some of the things that spiritualists do, and even ghost hunters, come from magician performers or fraudulent spiritualists. So that was kind of the topic of the piece. Also talked a little bit about kind of the magicians and mentalists who have supported parapsychology, who are ones who are proponents for ESP and other psychic paranormal things. That's kind of an important thing to us as well, because everybody seems to think that magicians are the enemy, thanks to the late amazing, or say unamazing, Randy. All right, Graveyard Grog, I need to dress up as Willy Wonka next Halloween. Probably not. Probably not. So hi to everybody who's here. And let's go ahead and kind of jump in if people have any questions. Otherwise, I can talk a little bit. Just want to say a couple more words about the Rhine Center, the Rhine Research Center. For those of you that don't know, the Rhine Research Center, that's RHINE, is the legacy of the original Duke Parapsychology Laboratory. That was the first time that there was a major laboratory established at a university. That was back in the 1930s. In fact, 1935. And this coming year, there'll be a number of things that the Rhine Center will be doing online and also in Durham, North Carolina, related to the 90th anniversary of the founding of the Duke Parapsychology Lab by J.B. and Louisa Rhine with William McDougall. So keep an eye on that website starting the beginning of the year. That's Rhine, RHINE.org. RhineOnline.org works too. And keep an eye on that. You'll see some kind of major things happening, and especially next fall, there's going to be a big anniversary celebration in North Carolina, which I think we'll be doing over the web too. We'll be doing a whole bunch of things over the web. For those that don't know, I am actually president of the board of directors. Somehow I got roped into that one. Anyway, Mary Prankster, what do you think of the magic of attraction and or manifestation? You know, this it kind of goes back to something from decades ago, the power of positive thinking. There have been a lot of folks in the motivational world have talked about that. There have been books around the power of positive thinking, all before The Secret came out, all of that. And there's something interesting about that kind of attitude of attraction, manifestation. It affects us. I mean, it may not affect the world around us, but when you have a positive attitude or believe that things are going to come to you, you may be doing two things. Number one, psychologically, your interaction with people and things around you and events around you is going to change. And number two, psychically, kind of unconsciously, you're kind of boosting the idea that we can pick up information from the environment and make decisions and be in the right place at the right time, all those things that might be happening too. I don't consider it magic so much, and it has its limits. Manifestation has its limits as well, even if it worked the way it's supposed to work, because maybe what you're manifesting is contradictory to what someone else is manifesting. So, kind of butt heads at that point. All right, Paul, you've been watching the TV show Ghost, still on season 1. You need to move along, Paul. There's the American version and there is the British version. So make sure you watch them both. The British version is available for rental, I believe, on Amazon Prime. It's probably on one of the streaming services for the British shows. It's a BBC show. But the American show is, of course, on Paramount Plus. You can definitely go back and watch that. Let's see here. Ms. Niz, you recently got your paranormal investigation certification from the Rhine. That's correct. That's right. Took a few certificates for the whole investigation program. How do you get started in the field? Well, from an investigation perspective, we are, I'm working with someone right now who is, and I'll be promoting this beginning of next year because we still have some work to do on it. We are doing an OPI, Office of Paranormal Investigations Network website. And one of the ways to get started is I'm going to be putting some information up about folks who have taken the courses and agreed to let me put their information, some of their information out. Not a lot, just enough for possible contacts for areas. But as far as getting started in the field in terms of research, that's a little tougher because there are not necessarily a lot of opportunities. But one is to be involved, even as a volunteer for various organizations, whether it's the Rhine Center or the Parapsychological Association, just contacting the PA, join the Parapsychological Association. You can do that even if you're not an academic. So there's different levels of actual membership. So definitely consider something like that. You might help out with the Forever Family Foundation, but really I'd say the Parapsychological Association, the Rhine Center, join the Society for Psychical Research, see what you might be able to kind of interact. The whole point is to interact with people in the field. And this coming year's Parapsychological Association convention, that's the big parapsychology convention, is going to be in Freiburg, Germany at the Institut Grenzgebiete. Which is a long, many, many decades. Another lab that's been around for a very, very long time. I think since the 50s or 60s. I will not be going, unfortunately, because it conflicts with another event I'm stuck with. So the year after that, it'll be back in the United States. So when it's back in the States, I would say definitely, if you can make it, come to that. But basically connect with people. And depending on your interest, I might be able to connect you with other folks. So, if you've taken my classes and you know how to get a hold of me, pretty easy to get a hold of me via email. All right, Jody Music. If I've watched Star Trek Unification short movie, I haven't seen the new short yet. I think that's the Roddenberry Archive. I've heard about it. I haven't just heard about it. Haven't had a chance to see it. I didn't know if it was on Paramount or not, but I'll take a look at it. I think is that the one where they've de-aged William Shatner a little bit? I was reading about that today, in fact. So it's been a kind of a busy week for me this week. So have to take a look at that. Anyway, thanks for those kind of starting points. I should mention, I did mention last time a couple books. I always like to kind of point people to books. And for those of you that are into, like I said, the history of spiritualism and other things, and art, like artwork, I just picked up this book, which is called Conjuring the Spirit World, which is actually kind of a book with lots of illustration. And it really kind of shows through posters for spiritualists, through some of the articles for spiritualists and magicians, how much influence there was between the two during the latter part of the 19th century. Spiritualism got started officially in 1848. Stage magic had been sort of around, but it really got popular with Robert Houdin and a number of other magicians with their shows. And they started doing shows focused on spiritual phenomena. And then there was an act called the Davenport Brothers that were the first ones to create and do the Spirit Cabinet Act, which seemed to apparently impress the heck out of some spiritualists. And so today we have physical mediums using spirit cabinets. Not the way the Davenport brothers were using them, though. Paul, let's see. Well, first, Jody definitely got an afterlife message and some de-aging going on. Oh, okay. I have to take a look at that. I'll look at that tonight. Thanks, Jody. Paul, you always go on the Society for Psychic Research, Ryan and Parapsychology Association, Foundation Facebook pages. UVA, yeah, the University of Virginia's Division of Perceptual Studies, for anyone interested in survival of bodily death. They have an extensive library of publications and an enormous amount of information. DOPS, for short, has been one of the major centers at a university for research on evidence for life after death. They have been the center for reincarnation research of a scientific nature since 1960. With Ian Stevenson and then Jim Tucker. And I'm not sure who Jim Tucker's replacement's going to be because Jim is retiring this year, at the end of this year. But definitely UVA, believe it or not, that's in the medical school. May not be pleasing to other people in the medical school, but they are one of the best groups of researchers, I think, in the world at this point. So definitely check them out if you have any interest in reincarnation, near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, apparitional stuff. They've done a lot of different kinds of research. Another organization I should mention that just put something else out is Windbridge Research Center. Windbridge, like it sounds, windbridge.org. Julie Beischel and Mark Bacuzzi have been doing some really great research, very well-controlled research with spirit mediums. And they just put out kind of a video and a piece, a literature piece on what to say to people who say that mediums are a load of bunk. So, you might take a look at that at Windbridge, what they've got as well. All of these organizations are nonprofits and worthy of support. The Rhine Center has a membership. You get a lot of benefits out of that, for sure, including discounts on courses. And you can kind of work with or see what you can kind of connect with the other organizations as well. I also should mention the Parapsychology Foundation, which is not going to be doing much of anything. Their funding is pretty much gone. They've lost their library had to be moved to the University of Maryland. But they're still got their website up. And one of the nicest things that they did was they scanned all their physical publications and they published conference proceedings on all sorts of topics over many years, and then monographs on all sorts of stuff. And they put it up for free. So if you go to parapsychology.org and you go to publications, you'll see all this stuff you can download for free. More reading than you'll probably do in the next 5 years. So there's a lot of free information on the web that's credible. You just have to know where to go for it. Dean Radin, who's one of our leading researchers, has a great library page of recommended resources, of free things you can download on the web, papers and books and other things. So there's a ton of stuff out there that you can get to. And that's one of the things I hope I impart to my students is how much is available. And what's a sad thing is that so many people in the ghost hunting world don't have any clue that all that information's out there for free. Mainly because the TV shows don't ever talk about it. So yeah, it's a shame. There's a lot of good stuff out there. All right. After that little monologue of mine, what do we have folks want to talk about? Questions? Yeah, please pop your questions in. Or if you have a topic you just want me to touch on, I'm happy to kind of riff on that topic as well. Let's see. Just give it a moment here to see if folks can think of anything for me to talk about. Otherwise, I'll kind of go off in a slightly different direction. Maybe talk a little bit more about the magic and psi connection. So you heard a cat meow. That was not here. My cats are downstairs. I'm not sure where you heard a cat meow. Maybe one of my previous cats are kind of jumping in. That's kind of funny. All right. So while we're waiting for some other topics, thought I'd point out, just one thing about mediumship that's important for folks who are not always aware of it. Most of what I've heard over the years about fraudulent mediums has really been physical mediumship. This is back from the 19th century in some respects. We see images on television and in movies of the seance, and people are gathered around the seance table, and there's the medium, sometimes dressed in funky clothing. There might be a crystal ball or something out. There's usually candles on the table. In fact, the only reason they have to have candles on the table is for TV or for the film itself. Otherwise, just going to show pitch darkness. And one of the things that happened in the early days of spiritualism, once spiritualism kicked off, a lot of people came out and said that they could converse with the dead. We can all talk to the dead. Whether we hear them back is a different story. So a lot of people were going out there. And some of the early mediums, including the Fox sisters, were what we call physical mediums, in that they were getting physical activity or physical phenomena that was happening in their presence when they were ostensibly communicating with usually a spirit control, like one individual spirit that was the facilitator to contact other spirits. And sometimes never even talking to other spirits, just the spirit control. The problem being that when you have physical phenomena and you're not producing real evidence, that can be real evidence because it technically, if it's a spirit doing it, it's still mind over matter. It's still psychokinesis or PK. And I'll get to your question in a moment, Claire. But one of the things that happened is that there were people who saw that there was an opportunity to take advantage of people. Now, there were those who went on the stage, like the Davenport brothers, and entertained, never claimed anything either way. There are those who got clients and claimed that they could talk to their relatives. And this is not the mental mediums or the mediums we know of for the most part today. These are, again, the physical mediums. And originally, physical mediumship had people who could do things at the very least, low light, if not full light in that, for a fact. But over time, the frauds, seeing what magicians were doing, like the Davenport brothers and the spirit cabinets, got ideas and started coming up with different ways to fake effects as well, and learned over time that the lower the light, the more you could fake. That continued until actual darkness in the early 20th century, which creates a problem for any researcher trying to do anything with physical mediumship. But also, it made it really easy for people to fake things. It also apparently influenced the potentially real physical mediums who, like psychics, many psychics today, are stuck with their clients' expectations. How can you do anything like that? If you do it in the light, you must be a phony. It's actually the other way around when it comes down to it. So, magic, the stage magic has influenced spiritualism. Spiritualism influenced stage magic early on. The two were intertwined. And of course, spiritualism also influenced science, because that's how the Society for Psychical Research got started. People trying to figure out, well, whether any of this was real and what was going on. So, Kathy, I'll get to your question in a moment. Claire, do you think the popular places labeled paranormal are made worse or exacerbated into negativity due to so many people going to do investigations? So a couple things. They can be made worse when the place itself doesn't hold a tight rein on the investigators who are coming in. There was a case in Louisiana, I think it was, of a building burning down. The ghost hunters caused a fire. There have been significant damage done by ghost hunters to some places. So the places that hold a tight rein on what they can do and when they can be there, I don't think they're made worse. I think some of the historical locations have actually been able to get a new source of revenue to keep themselves open. It's always difficult when a museum or a historic house that becomes a museum, it's hard for them to keep going unless they have patrons or donors. So charging ghost hunters money to stay overnight is one avenue for revenue to keep them going and to actually fix the place up. So I think that's a positive. The negative side, however, which was first brought up by John Sable in a paper he wrote a few years ago. He's an archaeologist and paranormal investigator, and he suggested, which I think was a really good point, that since we as living people leave impressions behind and leave information behind, the more ghost hunters that come in, and by the way, that's called a residual haunting. Living people create those. Ghost hunters are probably going to be creating problems for those locations or shifting the story. So that at some point in the future, some ghost hunters or people might come to a house that one of these popular places, and what they experience has nothing to do with the history of the house or the building itself. It has to do with the ghost hunting team that was there 5 years ago. So I'd say that's a negative in some respects. Kathy, have you ever seen impressive physical mediumship? I've seen impressive psychokinesis in the light. I've only been to one physical mediumship seance. I was not impressed for many, many reasons. It was Kai Mugi of the Felix Experimental Circle. One of the things that one of the pieces of activity that happened was absolutely fraudulent. I know that for a fact. Some of the stuff that happened in this very lengthy room at the very end where I was, where he put me very far, 30 feet away from him, more than that, actually. Was questionable. Might have been real, might not. The ectoplasm I saw, definitely not impressive. Even at a distance, it looked like luminous silk. And in fact, it came up to a point as if somebody was holding a thread to pull it up. So I was not impressed. I know other people, another seance that he did, apparently a hand came out of it. The question is whether Kai or some of these other people are mixed mediums. We have that term in parapsychology because there have been mediums who have been studied thoroughly, but under the tightest controls, they've been able to produce effects. In the less tight controlled stuff, they might fake stuff as well. One of the most famous mediums of the 20th century was Eusapia Palladino, who actually had a proponent. At one point, Howard Thurston, the very famous magician, basically could not figure out how a table levitated while they were doing a session with her. And there were other magicians who went in. She did real things, but she also faked things. And she was quoted as saying, faking it is easier, mainly because she claimed that the personal energy, not spirit energy, to do the real thing took a lot out of her. and there was some evidence that she would lose weight, like 5 pounds during a seance. So she was known as a mixed medium because there might have been real stuff and fake stuff. I'd say Uri Geller is a mixed medium site or a mixed psychic because he seemed to have real abilities to bend things, but not all the time. And, you know, he's also a magician. So yeah, that's kind of, it makes it difficult. And frankly, there was not a single verbal thing, Kathy, that came out of Kai Mugi's mouth. For 4 hours, he was supposedly in trance with a parapsychologist who passed away years ago, Hans Bender, coming through. And in fact, I think the most amazing thing that Kai did is taking his very kind of meek, high-pitched voice and getting a lower, gravelly voice coming out of his mouth for 4 hours. That shows a lot of, that was, you know, that's a lot. Bender said, the Bender control spirit never said a single thing that would have indicated that he was actually Hans Bender or involved in parapsychology. So there's no evidence in that way. Okay, Ms. Niz, do you think ghost hunters can create their own phenomena, their own size? Yeah. In fact, there's a real question for us about EVP, because there are certain people I know from talking to different groups over the years, and I know from my colleagues talking to certain groups, people from different groups over the years, that there'll be one person in a group very often who always gets EVP no matter where they go. And I question that. I would say that person either is, and we're assuming there's no fraud there, that person either is unconsciously creating those voices through PK, psychokinesis, because that's, if a spirit does it, it's still PK, or they're acting like a medium. You know, there's spirits there, but they're letting the spirits kind of work through them to affect the recording device, you know, kind of a techno medium, if you will. So I think that there's a possibility there, but there is a question as to whether how much we living people unconsciously, because of our expectations, affect things around us as well, and how much is really spirit and how much is us. And especially when you have no indication other than technology that there's a spirit present, no one's having an experience, I would say it's probably more likely that it's one of the investigators or somebody alive who's doing it. Indie Stalker, let's see. Can't wait for your next class, the Rhine. Everyone here should, if you haven't tried a class with Lloyd, thank you, Tony. Appreciate that. Our next classes for the Rhine will be starting up in February, the very beginning of February. We will be having them posted hopefully before the new year, but certainly by the first week of the new year, we'll have the classes posted. I'm tentatively scheduled. I'm not sure what classes exactly I'm teaching, other than I'm pretty sure we're Kenny Biddle and I are doing the skeptical approach to parapsychology. So an actual middle of the road approach to how you assess evidence and things, especially in investigations, but just in general. Next class in survival will probably be in the spring, Paul. That's typically the schedule for that class. There may be something else in between, but that is the next class we've got scheduled for that. And yeah, and definitely please keep those questions coming, everybody. It's really always interesting to teach classes. John Kruth, who's the executive director, and I just finished teaching an ethics class, which is a hard thing for a lot of folks. Not that I think a lot of people are highly unethical. There's been a lot of unethical behavior in the unethical towards the clients that we've seen occur in the ghost hunting world, in the paranormal community. I have had people call me and tell me they had the local ghost hunting group come in, and they're concerned for a couple of reasons. One reason is they called for help, got the local folks in, and the ghost hunters confirmed there was something going on in their house, showed them the evidence, and then left them. Didn't give them any help. Didn't even give them really explanation. It's even worse when sometimes what the ghost hunters do, this has happened twice that I know of, where people have called me or contacted me, where clients in a residential case said that, let's give one example. The ghost hunting group that came in asked them to step out and stay at a hotel overnight so they could be alone in the house, which I think is inappropriate in at so many levels. But what's interesting is at about 4 o'clock in the morning, they got a call at the hotel. And it was the head of the ghost hunting group, the leader, telling them they had to leave the house. We had to leave the house. You have a demon in your house. We got this horrible growl on EVP. We're never coming back. You should move. Well, there was no indication that there was anything demonic going on at all or anything awful. There was some other stuff going on in the house that was some physical, but it was mostly apparitional stuff. And it freaked this couple out completely. So in many respects, one must have the same kind of ethical mandate that so many of the helping professions have, is never leave them worse off than when you found them. Never do that. But we had this ethics class, and John's approach, John Cruth's approach was, if you want to do this from a really truly scientific approach where you want to write up your cases, submit them to journals, all of that, you should have an institutional review board. Then we talked about, I talked about the necessity for that versus the necessity for doing yourself what an institutional review board would do for you, which includes having a consent form and things like that. So we'll be teaching that again next year, for sure. Let's see here. Do you think obviously fake ghost hunters on YouTube should be required to call their videos for entertainment purposes only? Yeah. They're never going to go for that. When it's regulated by the FCC or it's coming through on something like a streaming service, they're going to put something like that on there for a lot of reasons, mainly for liability purposes. But I can't imagine YouTube forcing them to do that because there's so much other fake stuff on YouTube that is considered parody or satire and things like that. It would be really, I would love to see them do that. Folks are doing that, or at least have some kind of disclaimer saying we've edited for story, because that's what it is. Or even we're not sure what this is. There's so much certainty that's presented so often on the so-called evidence that's there when they really can't do it. So, and it would be nice if there was some, after the show kind of thing on the paranormal TV shows on streaming services and the cable channels that explained how, just something briefly explaining how shows are edited for producers to present a story, and it may not reflect what actually happened, unfortunately. Yeah, I don't know that I think the chief thrill is the people going to these places and playing at being investigators, because that's a lot of them. But there's a lot of cheap thrills for the audience too. I mean, I think there are a lot of thrill seekers who are in the paranormal community. There are a lot of fans of the shows. That's what a lot of those conferences are. That's why they have to have a celebrity there to bring people in. It's just the nature of what we have dealt with. It's almost surprising that there are not something didn't develop around the TV show Cops, but that's a very different thing, of course, because people can't play act at being cops. They can play act at being ghost hunters, of course. Catherine, once saw a medium in trance in England take on a stroke after the session, then went back to normal. Tough part, no one knew who the stroke spirit was. He was sitting in a cabinet. Yeah, interesting. If we look at the phenomenon of channeling back in the 1980s, if any of you were around that long ago, there were channelers, so mediumship wasn't as popular. Channeling was popular back in the 80s, especially. And channeling was somebody would go into trance and allow something to come through. And it could have been an ancient spirit, often people from ancient Egypt. The most famous one, Ramtha, Jay-Z Knight channeled 35,000-year-old Atlantean warrior prince, supposedly, whose advice sounded more like financial advice and Dr. Joyce, like a pop psychology than anything else. There were channelers who channeled aliens. There were channelers who channeled people from hundreds of years ago due to their ancestry. And they could be in that state for hours and act very, very differently. And the question often was how much of this was the unconscious mind, the personality that is kind of that person, of the channeler. And in fact, I know of at least one circumstance, because we worked with a woman who was a channeler, who was coming out with psychic information, which was interesting. And she had only been channeling for a few years. It happened spontaneously for her. And we, myself and a couple of others, worked with her. And she was able to realize and integrate these other personalities that were coming through so that she was the psychic, not Archon from the Pleiades, or the 17th century Irish woman who was her ancestor, that kind of thing. So, there's always that question. And that may be happening also with some of the physical mediums in terms of the control spirits. And there's just no way, unlike evidential mediums like Catherine Nadal, who is with us right now, who's asking that question. She is one of our Forever Family Foundation mediums, highly recommended. We have levels of evidentiary quality of information, evidential information, which you do not get from physical mediums, typically. There's a few, but it's pretty rare in general. All right, let's see. My thoughts on paranormal state. Well, let me go back a little bit here. Graveyard grog, yeah, that's right. That, the people who suffer, actually, the whole point of our ethics class was, let's not make the client suffer. Okay. Paranormal state. Well, first, Ryan Buell had his own personal, and I do, having met him a couple times and talked to him otherwise, he firmly believed in demons. Demons sell better than ghosts when it comes right down to it, when it comes to television shows. And so Ryan's vision for the show was the vision that the production company and the network actually agreed to. Unfortunately, the show was incredibly skewed in that direction, even in situations where there was nothing negative happening. I happen to know of a woman right on the border of Oregon and Washington who actually they threatened to sue. A&E threatened to sue her because she came out and talked about behind the scenes and what had actually happened in her house. She had or has a friendly spirit, apparently of a pharmacist who she'd been communicating with. She actually tracked down who it was when she started having these communications with him, and was able to identify him. And there was a Native American spirit that was supposedly in her house. There was some negative energy in one part of her house, which could have been, kind of that residual thing. And she, after the show aired, she had written to Paranormal State, and they came up and did a show. She wanted them to get rid of the negative energy, but she was, fascinated to see what they would do with the other piece. Well, after the show aired, she was really mad because they made the pharmacist ghost into a bad guy, that he was responsible for the negative. There was all sorts of stuff going on. She was very mad. Apparently the spirit was mad too, according to her. So she started talking about it. And she talked about the fact that Chip Coffey was given information during the shoot. Now, that may not be normal in the shoots that they did, but that certainly was something she mentioned that happened. I know of other cases in TV where someone was fed information, intentionally or not. If they overhear things, that's not a good thing, because then they can use it. Even if they use it unconsciously, it's not a good thing. So there was also an issue with the thermal vision where something was planted that would show up on thermal vision a certain way. And it was all edited again the way it was. So she got kind of yelled at by the production company. because she supposedly signed the, the release form with the NDA, the non-disclosure, and all of that. Well, what happened was apparently, and A&E got involved because it's the parent company. What happened was the release form that she was given was an older release form. The same thing with all the witnesses that they talked to in the town. It was an older release form that didn't have an NDA on it. It was actually a standard release form, which was not what A&E had started using. This is something I talked about in the ethics class. I talk about it in one of my other classes as well, that the standard release forms from certain shows and networks include the most horrendous language that you should never sign, especially the inability to talk about your experience with the show. Maybe, I always change it where I will not talk about the show or my experience with the show until after the show, that episode airs. Then all bets are off. And you don't want to give away your rights. But she actually didn't sign that release form. That was a producer's fault. So A&E had to back off. They couldn't couldn't sue her because there was no reason to sue her. There's nothing that she did wrong in that particular situation. But what it did do is, that was a time that these terrible release forms started coming out, including ones that say, we can, if we feel like it, more or less, defame you intentionally with malice. I mean, there's release forms that actually say that. I know Barry Taft got one. I got one like that. Don't sign them. Just cross it all off. Change them. If they don't want to work with you, that's fine. That's up to you. I mean, you can always do that. You can always sign them, but then all bets are off. Okay. So anyway, Paranormal State. I was asked to do the show multiple times by Ryan, by other folks. I said no every time. Just wasn't going to do it because of the demon thing, which is unfortunate that it went that way because Sergey, who was one of the investigators, before the first show aired, I spent a long time on the phone with him, and I talked to him a few times after that. I think it was a few times. I talked to him at least once or twice after that. And he was incredibly knowledgeable about parapsychology. But if you watch that show, he's not the main guy, and he barely has a chance. He barely has any airtime, screen time, which is really unfortunate. It's also disgusting to have fakers explaining recent tragedies in the bereaved family. That is true. That is absolutely true. And contrary to what many of the pseudo-skeptics, the debunking skeptics say, that's not what most mediums do. There's a few fakers out there. There's frauds in every field who take advantage of the bereaved. I mean, given the number of scams that there are now trying to take financial advantage of senior citizens, of people who just lost a loved one, have nothing to do with the paranormal, it's not unusual that there's some bad apples in the paranormal world too. Paul, I'm glad you're a member of the Forever Family Foundation. Thanks for mentioning that. The Forever Family Foundation, you can join for free and support us. It's just foreverfamilyfoundation.org. Pretty easy to get there. Clary quit watching all the Power shows purely because this constant negative demon focus. Yeah, honestly, people always ask me, have you watched X, Y, and Z show? And it's like, no. I was watching a few of them, just a little bit here and there. The new shows, I'd watch an episode here and there. There are just so many of them at this point. I don't even keep track of them anymore. And frankly, they bore the hell out of me, and they annoy me to no end. And I get nothing out of watching them other than to know who the idiots are. Let's put it that way. But unfortunately, a lot of times it's not necessarily the investigators. It's actually the producers. Don't really know from watching those shows. Paul, I remember watching the TV show Unsolved Mysteries back in the 80s. They had a show on demons. Yeah, and Lorraine Warren was on it. Yeah, they're the ones who set the tone for the demon thing, unfortunately, very unfortunately. And I know of a couple clients that back in the day, back in the 80s, I spoke to people in the New York, Connecticut area who had the Warrens come in and were freaked out by the Warrens because they didn't believe that, they didn't think their house was infested by demons. And in fact, one of the cases, it turned out that the Warrens declared there was a demon there. There ended up being a normal explanation for it. I also spoke to a psychologist who was kind of like going on the Warrens' coattails, kind of paying attention to the cases they were involved in, because she was specializing in helping people who are traumatized by investigators claiming that there was a demon in the house. Kind of terrible, terrible thing. Can you imagine hanging out at a favorite place in the afterlife and constantly being asked by ghost hunters how you died? Yeah, that's pretty amusing. Here's another thing. There's the provoking thing that a lot of ghost hunters like to do, and then they get really freaked out when they get a growl or something happens on audio on their EVP, and they say immediately it must be a demon. Let's remember that as far as we know, for the most part, ghosts are people too. They were living people at one point. They're hanging around as ghosts, as apparitions, as consciousness without a body. If somebody comes into your house, the place you live, or where you are, and starts yelling at you to, all sorts of things, including more or less dance monkey dance, I don't know about you, but if I were able to, as a spirit, I would whack them upside the head, which of course would immediately cement me as a demon. I do my best to get them out of the house, whatever I could. Again, they'd say I was a demon for that. In reality, those of us in the field of parapsychology would look at the behavior of those provoking ghost hunters as the demonic behavior of human beings. That's the evil stuff. That's the bad stuff, not the spirits. They're reacting like normal human beings, like they should. And I think that if people are, if there are spirits actually in some of these haunted places, being asked constantly over and over again how they died, it's up to them. Maybe that's the only joy they get is doing communication in some way. Or maybe it just prevents boredom for them. Or maybe they're not going to give the same answer twice. I mean, that's another thing you could do if you were a spirit. You could lie. There might only be one spirit in a place, but all the EVPs could be done by one spirit in that case, who's just screwing around with the ghost hunters. Can't really be sure about things like that at this point. Not without a really good medium with you, a good psychic or medium, somebody who actually can have communication. There are those who do not want to work with psychics and mediums for various reasons. The shows have kind of done that. I always love it when the shows, the ghost hunters in the show say, we never work with psychics. The next thing you know, they're working with Chip Coffey. Really ridiculous. If you find and can work with someone, there's more than just are they psychic, and being a medium is also being psychic. There's some other personal qualities that one must be aware of. How you can get along with them, how they work with you, all of that. That's not even a psychic thing, but that should be applying to all your team members, if you have a team at all. But they can tell you if someone's there, but so can the witnesses if they've had experiences. Kicking the witnesses out of a house makes no sense to me at all, because if they are the ones who are seeing the ghost, shouldn't you have them there to tell you there's a ghost around that can connect to when you're getting weird readings on your devices? That made no sense to me whatsoever. Graveyard Grog, I would troll the living and say something. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Can you mention, all right, haunted cemeteries. One of the things that's really interesting about cemeteries, first, and Catherine, you deal with people on the other side. When we think about people sticking around after their death here without going to the other side, personality doesn't change much. I could see a gravedigger who died, or a cemetery worker sticking around after at their place of work. But the only reason that a normal human ghost would stick around at a cemetery where their body is, I mean, why would which is not even necessarily buried for days, unless you're Jewish, in which case you're planted into the ground pretty quick. There's no connection between the body and the spirit. No real connection, other than maybe a psychological one. So I could see that happening with a few people who think that that's what they have to do, but that would be really boring. It's more likely that the mourners leave an impression behind, an imprint behind. And remember that imprints of people, residual stuff of people, residual hauntings of people, of living people, are seen as figures, but they're not interactive. So I can see that happening as well. That's more likely what's going on most of the time. Now, that's not to say that someone who dies someplace else goes to visit the cemetery where he's buried every so often, like the family does. Just make sure that his own gravesite is kept up. I would say that's a human thing to do. Graveyard, yeah. There are some very beautiful cemeteries. Graveyard Grog sent me a picture of that one, the entry point for that cemetery. I spent a long afternoon at Sleepy Hollow Cemetery a couple of years ago when I was visiting New York, visiting my family back in New York. I grew up near Sleepy Hollow. Beautiful cemetery. We have a city south of San Francisco called Colma, where the motto of the city is the city where the dead outnumber the living. They moved after the 2006 earthquake. They moved almost all the bodies, moved all the cemeteries to Colma. And that's where there are some incredibly beautiful monuments. It's a really beautiful place. You'll find some historical figures that are buried there. Actually, Wyatt Earp is buried in the Jewish section of the cemetery. Pretty interesting stuff there. And there's even a monument to a train derailment and crash that killed was a circus train and killed a number of circus clowns. That's a really interesting monument to go look at. So anyway, I've yet to read your paranormal casebook. Still reading Hauntings and Apparitions. You recommend your experience what do you recommend your experience if there happens to be an incorporeal jerk there? That's okay. So that's a good way of putting it. I think that an apparition who's a jerk because they were a jerk in life, you have to think about ways to annoy them out of the house. We came up with this years and years ago, partly because I had a case with a peeping Tom ghost who was popping in on this woman and her daughter, her 16-year-old daughter. They were both very attractive when they were taking a shower, getting dressed or undressed, things like that. Definitely, a jerk. So as we were talking about solutions, what to do next, I was talking with the family. There was a 5-year-old boy also had just had his birthday, son there. And for his birthday, he had learned to read. And for his birthday, his parents gave him a bunch of joke and riddle books. And he's trying to tell us knock-knock jokes and riddles and things like that. And I know you all know the kinds of jokes I'm talking about that a 5-year-old would ask, would throw out there. It was pretty annoying, and it suddenly occurred to me how annoying this was. And we did a reading of the riddles. We got the books out. The kid was really ecstatic. He was laughing so hard. And every so often, we did for about an hour, every so often I'd say, and if you come back, this is going to happen again, very sternly. Never had another occurrence. So that worked, at least on that one jerk. And having something repetitive. And if you remember the movie Ghost, where the character, this is kind of a flip on this. Whoopi Goldberg is a fake medium who suddenly, it turns out, can hear. She's clairaudient. She can hear spirits. And Patrick Swayze's character, Sam, tries to get her attention, and she's ignoring him, pretending she's not hearing him. So he starts singing an old 60s song, Henry VIII, and sings it over and over and over and over and over again until she finally relents. Okay, well, that came, Bruce Joel Rubin used my first book, ESP Hauntings and Poltergeists, and one of Scott Rogo's books, which is a little older than my book, as research material. And in my book, I talked about the idea of annoying a ghost out of a house using the same song over and over again, or something very repetitive that it may also bother you a lot, but it will bother them. You want to make it kind of a hostile work environment in that sense. So that does work. I've had other clients who have used that technique. It works pretty well. It may be really annoying to you. So, pick something. You have to pick something that is going to be annoying if you can figure out who this ghost is or their age range, things like that. I was interviewed by the Associated Press years ago, back in the 90s at some point, kind of mid to late 90s. It was probably the mid 90s now that I think about it. And they asked me, this very question. And I said, if you have a dead old white guy, play rap music over and over again to get rid of the ghost. If it's somebody who's, just, you can go based on assumption. If it's somebody, if it's depending on who the person is and how they're behaving, if you can figure out what is the music that would most annoy them. I mean, will it be classical music? Will it be something else? For me, part of the article said also, I said, if it was me, it would be twangy country music would really annoy me out of the house. So the Associated Press wrote a short version of the story, different pieces ran, and what ended up happening was the short version had, rap music gets rid of ghosts. I suddenly got inundated by country music stations asking me that, how can, to talk about rap music getting rid of ghosts. And I always disappointed them because I said, I grew up in New York and I'm a R&B kind of guy. It would be country music that got me out of the house if I was the ghost. They were never happy about that. Anyway, Graveyard Grog, how many clowns do they fit in the casket? I don't know if it was a really big casket. I think it's just a memorial. I don't know how many clowns are actually buried there. I don't remember at that point. Anyway, yeah, we could all put up the music that would get rid of us, I'm sure. And maybe that's a good icebreaker. Think about this. If you ever need an icebreaker question for a work meeting or for a party or something like that, say, okay, if you were a ghost, what music or song would make you leave the house? I think it's a good icebreaker. And I will mention that the U.S. Army played a Rolling Stones song over and over and over again, blaring it when Manuel Noriega, they were trying to get him out of a place. He was a drug dealer kind of guy in South America, trying to get him out of that place. So not that they got it from me. I don't think I'm the only one who came up with the idea of playing, annoying music. But yeah, and thank you, Mary Prankster. I think that's a really good point, too. That is a very funny thing, that playing the piano keys and says, this drives them crazy. You know what would drive most people crazy? The sounds of nails on a blackboard. Doesn't bother me at all, but I know it bothers a lot of folks. Okay, we're down to the wire here. It's 6:28. Well, I'll be back in 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks after that. So the 8th of December, I believe it is, and the 22nd are the next two sessions, those 2 Sundays. And then, of course, we'll start again in January. And if you have questions in between, go ahead and you can send me an email to askprofparanormal@gmail.com or just prof, P-R-O-F, paranormal@gmail.com. You can do that. I'm very happy to take those questions and put them towards the next session. I will probably, very often I'll answer you first anyway, but I'll still maybe use the question in another session. But that's a way to get a hold of me. Feel free to email me if you have any questions about anything related here. And if you need recommendations for resources, online resources for books and things like that to try, I'm happy to provide that as well. As was mentioned, my Paranormal Casebook, the second edition of that, is available and has been since the beginning of the year on Amazon, as are a number of my other books. I will be over the next year. In the next year, I'm hoping to get 2 new books out. First of all, get the reprint back out of my Mind Over Matter book, and also get 2 new books out there. One will be a second volume of a Paranormal Casebook, and the other will be kind of a version of my class that I've taught for the Rhine in the summer, presenting the paranormal to the public. Thank you, everybody, for tonight. Have a great, happy Thanksgiving. Whoever you're going to be with, and have fun in the next couple weeks. Claire, you had someone pulling posters off the wall, knocking over books. Yeah. Tell them to quit. Tell them they weren't welcome. Play some music. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.